All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into the story of how one of the world's biggest nations won its freedom. It was a fight that went on for 30 years, and it was really shaped by one incredible man, Mohandas Gandhi, and a single, powerful idea that completely changed how people protest, forever. Okay, so to really get this, we have to start with the single most important concept, satyagraha. The word itself is from Sanskrit. You have satya, which means truth, and agraha, which means holding fast. So literally, it's holding on to truth. But here's the crucial part. This is not passive resistance. Not at all. As Gandhi saw it, this is intense, active political struggle carried out by huge numbers of people, all grounded in nonviolence. Now, what's so interesting is that this idea wasn't actually born in India. It was forged in the fire, you could say, over 2 decades in South Africa. In 1893, a young Gandhi, just 24 years old, arrives there as a lawyer and is just hit by this wall of humiliating racial discrimination. So, for the next 21 years, he gets to work. He organizes the Indian community, he founds the Natal Indian Congress, and he puts satyagraha to the test for the very first time. By the time he gets back to India in 1915, he's not just a lawyer anymore. He's a tested leader with a proven method for mass action. So, he's back in India. But he doesn't immediately take on the entire British Empire. No, instead, he starts local. He applies his method in 3 specific, critical disputes that would basically become the proving grounds for satyagraha right there on Indian soil. And you can see his formula taking shape perfectly here. First, in Champaran, he gets behind these peasants who are being crushed by their landlords. Then, over in Kedah, he supports farmers who just can't pay their land taxes because their crops had failed. And in Ahmedabad, he helps out mill workers fighting with the mill owners. You see the common thread, right? In every single one of these, the playbook was satyagraha. And the real power, the engine for change, was always getting the masses, the everyday people, involved. Now, here's something that might surprise you. Gandhi didn't start out as this major adversary to the British. Actually, during World War I, he was a cooperator. He was actively encouraging Indians to support the British war effort with the hope, the belief, that this loyalty would be rewarded with Swaraj, with self-rule, once the war was over. But that hope, that spirit of cooperation, it just got shattered. After the war, instead of giving India more freedom, Britain passed the Rowlatt Act. And this was a really repressive law. It basically gave the government the power to arrest and imprison anyone they suspected of being a revolutionary without any trial. For Indians who had just supported Britain in the war, this felt like a huge slap in the face, a total betrayal. The absolute breaking point, though, came in April 1919. In Amritsar, at a place called Jallianwala Bagh, a huge, peaceful crowd had gathered. British troops showed up, blocked the only exit, and opened fire. Hundreds of unarmed men, women, and children were killed. The shock and horror that went through India was just immense. It was so profound that the great poet Rabindranath Tagore publicly gave up his knighthood from the British, saying that these badges of honor were now just a glaring mark of shame. So all of that disillusionment, that anger from the Rowlatt Act and the Amritsar massacre, it all came together to fuel the first ever nationwide movement. The goal? To bring the whole machine of British rule to a grinding halt. The non-cooperation movement had this really smart 2-pronged approach. On one side, you had the positive program. This was all about building self-reliance, promoting Swadeshi or local Indian goods, bringing back traditional crafts like hand spinning, and working on social reforms. Then you had the other side, the negative program. This was a direct boycott of the key pillars of British rule, refused to take part in their legislatures, their courts, their schools, and hand back any titles or honors they'd given you. And the movement was huge. Millions of people got involved. But then, in 1922, in a town called Chari Chora, a protest turned violent, and a mob killed several policemen. For Gandhi, this was a disaster. It went against his most fundamental principle. So in a move that just stunned his followers, he called the whole thing off, the entire nationwide movement. He called it a Himalayan blunder. It just proves how absolute his commitment to nonviolence was, even if it meant losing political momentum. Okay, so after a few years out of the political spotlight, where he focused more on social work, Gandhi comes back to the national stage in 1930. And he comes back with what is, without a doubt, his most famous, most symbolic act of defiance ever. Think about this for a second. The British had a total monopoly on salt. They controlled its production, its sale, and they put a tax on it. This was a tax that affected every single person in India, from the richest to the poorest. So the question was, how in the world do you build a national protest, a challenge to a global empire, around something as basic, as everyday as salt? The answer was just beautiful in its simplicity. You walk. Gandhi and a small group of his followers set out from his ashram and just started walking. They walked 385 kilometers to the coast. It took them nearly a month, and as they walked, the crowds grew, thousands and thousands of people joined in, and the whole thing became this massive media event, watched by India and the world. The real power here was the symbolism. On April 6th, he finally gets to the sea, he bends down, and he picks up a little lump of natural salt from the ground. With that one tiny, simple act, he was breaking the British law. It was a direct challenge to their authority, to their economic control, and that was the signal. It launched a whole new wave of civil disobedience, with people all over India making their own salt in defiance of the salt law. So now we're entering the final act. The start of World War II in 1939 changes everything. It creates this new global backdrop and, inside India, a real sense of urgency. This was it. This was going to be the final all-out push for freedom. You can see how fast things escalate. Britain declares India is at war without even asking Indian leaders. So Congress ministries resign in protest. By 1942, the British try to offer a deal, Dominion status after the war, but it gets rejected. Gandhi famously calls it a post-dated check on a crashing bank. With talks going nowhere, the stage was set for the final confrontation. So, in August 1942, Gandhi launches the Quit India movement. And the man who started as a cooperator, the man who preached nonviolence above all, he gives the people a new slogan. A powerful, uncompromising slogan. Cuddle ya motto. Do or die. The message couldn't be clearer. This wasn't about negotiating anymore. This was a demand for the British to leave, immediately and completely. Well, the pressure from movements like Quit India, plus the fact that Britain was just exhausted after World War II, it worked. It finally led to independence. But the victory, when it came, wasn't simple or clean. It was bittersweet, and it came at a truly terrible price. The political situation was a deadlock between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, and communal violence was getting worse and worse. So, the last British viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, he came up with a plan, partition. The idea was to divide the country into two separate independent nations, India and Pakistan. And on August 15, 1947, British rule finally ended. But this freedom came with the unbelievable trauma of partition, which forced millions from their homes and led to some of the most horrific violence imaginable. And that leaves us with this final, really difficult question. Gandhi's entire philosophy, Satyagraha, was built on an unbreakable commitment to nonviolence. And it worked. It mobilized a nation and won independence. But that independence arrived in a moment of absolute, horrific violence. So how do you square that? How do you reconcile the amazing triumph of a nonviolent revolution with the unimaginable tragedy of its conclusion? What then is the real legacy of holding on to truth?